Welcome to another edition of the Bully Pulpit Show, where our guests get to speak their mind. I'm Mark Joseph, and my guest today is a very special author of one of the most amazing books, really, that I've ever read, called Seeds of Greatness. His name is Dennis Waitley. This is called The 10 Best Kept Secrets of Total Success. Dennis, thank you for joining us.
Mark, great to be with you.
Well, you've written lots of books. This just happens to be one that greatly impacted my life.
Well, I've written the same book, but I put a different title on it. You know, you have that one book and you keep number 2 and son of and sequel to, but that was the one book that I really had in me, I think.
We've had a lot of guests on the show, some of them very famous, but your book was just very impactful. I read it as a teenager, and it was so practical. I mean, you had things in there like, here's how you, when you call somebody, say, hi, this is so-and-so calling for so-and-so. Your book was a combination of very practical advice as well as talking about dreams and goals for the future. But just tell us about really how you got started in this area of motivational speaking and writing and so forth.
Well, first of all, you had to mention that you read it as a teenager.
Well, I'm sorry.
You know, people come up to me now and they're older, now maybe in their 40s, and they say, my father made me read your stuff or listen to your tapes. But I got started very early. I came from a dysfunctional family, maybe who didn't, and my mother and father got divorced early. My father left when I was 9, and I became attracted to my grandmother. I rode my bike 20 miles one way for the privilege of mowing her lawn, and we planted our victory garden together in World War II. And she told me really that what you put in the soil comes out. Weeds will arrive quite uninvited, and they don't even need nurturing or cultivating. They don't need watering. So the weeds of life just come at us all the time. But she told me if I planted the seeds of great ideas, modeled myself after people who'd been really successful in serving others, she told me to read the biographies of people who've overcome enormous handicaps to become successful. And as I read those biographies, I realized that those people overcame a lot more than I ever did. And even my father leaving home and me being the man of the family made me think there was something more in me that I could plant. So I devoted, even from junior high and high school on, to the idea that I was going to be Johnny Appleseed. I was going to run around and throw seeds out, and if people accepted them, fine. If they didn't. So that's kind of how the journey began. High school, I went to the Naval Academy with Ross Perot. He never let me forget it. You know, he was my upperclassman there, and he's never changed, incidentally. He could have become president, but he blinked. But I've had a long journey of reading, watching, listening, and never assuming that I know anything. In fact, I'm impressed by how little I know. I think the next book I should write should be How to Become Significant Through Your Own Insignificance. Because I really believe that I'm a oboe player in the 16th row of the maestro's orchestra. And people always look at themselves as the center of the universe, only to discover when they get older that they weren't that important in the overall scheme, but they did play a part in the orchestra.
How many books have you written?
16.
16 books. And take us through some of those. I mean, these are books about ideas, about success, spirituality.
Sure, I combined, I have Christian books and Christian crossover books and general books, but I started with The Winner's Edge. The New York Times published it back in 1979, and then I went to The Psychology of Winning, and that became a best-selling audio album. Then I did Seeds of Greatness, and then I followed up with Being the Best. You have to be the best in all that you do. Then I moved on to Timing is Everything, and The Joy of Working, and the new dynamics of winning, and From Child to Champion. But they've all been self-leadership. I don't believe you can lead anyone else unless you can lead yourself. And I really don't see how you can have people admire and respect you unless you're respectable. So if you want to be loved, be lovable. If you want to be respected, be respectable. And I also believe that there's a platinum rule. I know other authors have used it, but instead of treating everyone the way you want to be treated, what if you're a jerk? What if you're a real jerk, and what if you're a real aggressive kind of guy, and you want to confront people, and you like to use confrontational arrogance, and so you treat everyone the way you want to be treated, which is make them afraid of you, and then they'll bow to you. But what if you treated everyone the way they need to be treated, to be all they can be according to their own belief system? And you were patient enough to discover what turned them on and what they were really looking for. You know, I've never seen a business problem. I've only seen people problems that impact business. I've never seen a business problem. It's always a people problem. It's a I get late problem. It's a I have substance abuse problem. It's a anger problem. It's a self-esteem problem. But it's not a business problem, but it impacts the business of our lives. So I really think we pay too little attention to life management skills. Should be taught in school, no question, from junior high on up.
What would you say is the key ingredient, if there was one key ingredient to a successful person, both in every way, not just materially, what would that be?
I think it would be believing in your dream when that's all you have to hang on to. In other words, you haven't done anything special. You haven't proven anything. Your performance doesn't reflect anything, but your potential is what you believe in. You believe that there's something in you that yearns to be brought out. And so you hang on to that dream through everything. I think that's the most important thing of all. Otherwise, you would never invest in yourself. You'd never get educated. You'd never be persistent. Because unless you believe there's an expectation of something greater, you won't put the motivation or effort into doing it. I think that's the first, but I think I've been preaching that for 30 years, but I've discovered along the way there's a second ingredient that if you don't have it along with the first, you can't be successful anyway. And that's, we're creations of habit. And habits are submarines. They're silent and deep. And they rule our lives. Almost 90% of what we do is habitual, it's reflexive. We don't think about it. So we don't do what we know, we do what we've learned. And what we learn by observing, imitating, and internalizing, which really concerns me about the American culture, American society, and the way we raise our children. They're really being raised by entertainment media. And that's become the goal rather than just a pit stop on the way. So I think self-discipline, the ability to do within while you're doing without on a daily basis with a track to run on, with persistence, has to go along with this great dream of yours, because if you don't have the discipline, you won't even get off the launching pad.
You had so many little nuggets in this book, I remember. Where did you get those from? Was that your grandmother? Was it things you observed as you were coaching different people? Or was it just your ideas?
I don't think there's any original idea. I think a lot of it came from the New Testament, the Old Testament. My grandmother was a proofreader, and my grandfather owned a book bindery. So you can be sure that I probably plagiarized every philosophical proverb that came along and rearranged it, so that, you always project on the outside how you feel on the inside. Your net worth will be influenced by your self-worth. All of those cliches have worked for me because they're easy to remember. And of course, if you use acronyms, then it's even better. Luck, laboring under correct knowledge, L-U-C-K. And even my grandmother taught me that posh was poured out starboard home on the P&O ship line. If you're in the port side going out, you get to look out at the water. If you're on the starboard side coming in, you have a posh accommodation. I said, wow, do you mean everything is an acronym? She said, well, for example, tip. I said, tip, you mean like you tip a waiter? She said, well, what if you tip someone on what to invest in? So you could give the tip after the performance, or you could give the tip before. I said, so what does it mean? She said, to ensure performance. I said, oh, I see. You either inspire in advance or recognize for performance. She said, yeah, that's a good tip.
Hang on that thought. We'll be back in just a moment with our guest, Dennis Waitley. Stay tuned. And we're back with our guest, Dennis Waitley, the author of 16 books, I've learned, including a most recent book called The Dragon and the Eagle. This has not even been published yet. It's coming out very soon, though.
No, the ink's still wet.
Well, tell me about the Dragon and the Eagle. What is this about?
It's about China versus America. It's a fable. It is a conversation that the two characters have, the dragon being China and the eagle being the United States, and they meet quite unexpectedly, and the eagle says, wow, you're big, who's your fitness trainer? And the dragon said, I'm 5,000 years old, I've been around a while, and they start talking, and they realize that they have so many cultural differences, and yet so many of the same problems and aspirations that I'm hoping that when Americans read it, they realize why the jobs have flown. And when the Chinese read it, I hope they realize that they're on the precipitous side of the mountain where you slide down the other side when quality of life is the same as standard of living in your mind. The Chinese want to be rich at any cost, and that they're looking for standard of living. Now we're looking for quality of life because we realize there's a slight difference. So I'm trying to educate our population on getting the eye of the tiger back, and educate the Chinese population on there's more to it than MTV. And yet the Chinese young people are being influenced by our culture and going down the skin deep route, and yet we're not able to motivate our children to want to grow and contribute and participate. We just want to be cool, and we need to maybe both understand each other. So I wrote it for both cultures.
And it's published both in Chinese and English. The same book has English on one side and Chinese on the other. Yeah,
that's a little risky because then you go in the bookstore and you say, excuse me, you wouldn't have this in English, would you? And he said, well, no, it's in English. Yeah, I know, but it's $20, so it should be only 10. So, there's a risk factor that Borders and Barnes & Noble have said, you're leaning out there a little bit and nobody's done this in the same way before. And I said, well, let's try it. It's a design element and a wake-up call, and the way books are going to be published in China in the future. So I decided to do it both ways.
You speak around the world. I know you speak in Dubai and China. What do they want from you when they call you over to speak? What are they looking for from you?
They're looking for the secrets of authentic success. How do you keep integrity while you still want to do your own thing? What is the difference between quality of life and standard of living? And what have you learned through all the experiences? And they look at me as a success coach, somebody who's been seasoned enough to be able to discover the Olympian within and at the same time be a team player. So having spent a lot of times with the Olympics and training Olympic athletes mentally, they kind of look at me as a success coach. And that way, experience plus what's happening today means that I'm still in the game.
Now this book sold how many copies?
About 1.8 million in hardcover, maybe a couple of million in paperback.
So I'm just one of 1.8 million people. What is it like? I mean, when you think about that there are all these people out there in the world that have imbibed your values and ideas. You must hear from them occasionally. What is that like for you?
Well, I think I think it should be humbling to anybody. So I think the first thing is you should not be impressed, and that you should never embrace it, and you should never feel you've arrived, because success is tomorrow. There might be a problem with the children. There might be a catastrophe. The doctor might tell you have a spot on your lung. You might lose it all in the market. Success to me is something that is a way of living, but not a place that you get to. So I feel good about changing a few lives, but gosh, I haven't sold as many things as most of the pop stars have.
What kind of stories have you heard over the years? You must have heard from well-known people or others that were impressed or that were happy about. Any of those kind of stories that happened?
Well, there have been a lot of stories. Mary Lou Retton in 1984, when she won the first women's gold medal in gymnastics, I asked her what she was thinking about before she did the vault. And she said, what everyone thinks about: speed, power, explode, extend, rotate, plant the feet at the end. When the pressure's on, I get better, just like drill. This is your moment in history, need a 10, got a 10. I said, wow, I mean, that maybe isn't what I was thinking, but I'm sure glad you were thinking that. And you and I talked a little bit before the show about former President Reagan. The last time I was with him alone, before he became president, he had just been elected president. And he said, well, now I'm going to have to deliver on the promise. He said, it's one thing to sell yourself into a position, and it's another thing entirely to deliver the goods after you've gotten the position. And he said, I need to surround myself with very, very capable people. And I think he did that, and I've always really admired and respected him. You know, I was talking to Gorbachev after the Soviet Union fell apart, and Gorbachev said, that there was a man to reckon with. He said he really had a persona, and he said, I trusted him. And he said, I may not be welcome back in my former country, but I trusted him enough to go out on the limb myself.
You two spent a lot of time together, you and Governor Reagan back then.
Yes.
What do you think his secret of success was?
I think his approachability, honesty, humility, but his ability to grasp the big picture and to be a visionary of hope and to take America, into the sunrise instead of into the sunset. I think that he spoke to our core values, and he reminded me a lot of a pioneer, of a pioneering father of our country. And I think, but he backed it up with, he'd been a Democrat years before and been with the Screen Actors Guild and headed that, and maybe he wasn't the greatest actor in the world, although the media thought that he was acting. But I think it was his genuine caring about his family. It was obvious with his wife. It was obvious that he cared about America. And I think that is such a quality that is in short supply. Somebody who, what he says is what he means and what he's going to do. So I really admired that about him.
How important is acting in leadership? Do you have to act to project certain things in order to be an inspiring leader?
No, I think you have to have a little charisma, though. I mean, I think you're always acting as if you're projecting yourself into the future. So a leader is always optimistic, because a leader asks people to do things that are totally uncomfortable, maybe dangerous, and they don't understand them. And so they trust the leader's judgment. So in that sense, the leader has to be always optimistic, even if they're afraid or pessimistic. So I think not showing fear, even though you feel it, would be the only act that you would need to have. But I think integrity, politicians tell you what you want to hear. Leaders tell you what you need to know. Politicians want you to vote for them. Leaders want you to vote for yourself. And politicians will tell you that if you'll elect them, they'll solve your problems. And leaders will tell you that what you must do is take the initiative to help solve your own problem. So to be honest, saying that I can't do it for you, but I can do it with you is really important.
We come from an era of fallen leaders, beginning with President Nixon, President Clinton being impeached. We have the televangelists over the years. How do you think that has impacted people's leadership skills and willingness to be led by great leaders?
Well, I think those things have made people a little jaded, a little concerned, and I think we still, though, elect the king and queen of the prom. I'm very concerned that our elections have turned out to be popularity contests. And I think we're just listening for what we want to hear and hoping that somebody else will do something for us that we're not doing. And so I think that we tend to discount what they say. We forgive them. Obviously we do. We're a very forgiving population because even the fallen heroes who've done terrible things, we embrace and invite them to the parties, and they become media celebrities in spite of what they've done. So we tend not to take too personally their transgressions. I mean, I've had to say, being apolitical as a speaker, they say, well, are you Democrat or Republican? And I say, well, Nixon had a lack of integrity because he was afraid, and so they did the little dirty tricks kind of thing. Clinton, on the other hand, was doing it out of pleasure. But he had a lack of integrity because he pleasured himself at the expense of his own integrity. And a lot of people have difficulty holding a leader to higher standards than they hold themselves. But you absolutely must, because if a leader is going to tell you something, then he or she must act in actions what the words say. And I think integrity is one of the most important things of a leader, 24/7. How can you be partially honest? How can you cheat on your wife and not cheat on your country? How can you say one thing and do another? Very difficult, and yet we're very forgiving about political lives, except that they're up front, close, and personal now. And I think if you got a skeleton in your closet, you probably shouldn't run for office.
All right. We'll come back in just a minute with our guest, Dennis Waitley. Stay tuned.
Where are you off to? Such a hurry, girl. There's something chasing you. What has you spinning round in circles, little girl? Is it the world or is it you? There's no use trying to stop this. There's no use trying to make it go away before you disappear. Just give it time.
And we are back on the Bully Pulpit Show with my guest, Dennis Waitley. Dennis, we're talking about leadership. I'm also interested in your views on the culture. You talked about entertainment being the babysitter for a generation. If you could rewind 30 years, knowing what you know now, what would your advice be to America, to the culture, to the world, and what you've seen happen that you think has not been terribly good?
Well, I think history repeats itself unless we change. And the idea of needing visceral stimulation, when you have enough money and you get bored, you want to be entertained. And yet, normal entertainment doesn't do it for you. You need a roller coaster ride. You need to be shocked. The Hollywood entertainment media realizes that to sell tickets, you have to shock. And so in my opinion, what they do, using the First Amendment as their guide, they're saying they're only trying to express their free ideas. No one needs to watch. No one needs to listen. You have a choice. But what they don't realize is the pervasiveness of the broadcast message, be it on the internet or YouTube or whatever it is, it infiltrates, and through repetition, observation, imitation, repetition, fashion doesn't imitate life. Life imitates fashion. And what has happened, in my opinion, in our culture is we have made celebrities the leaders of the free world in America, and we've sold out to skin-deep pleasure. So it's style over substance, rather than substance over style. And it's stylistic behavior. It shows in all the narcissistic and hedonistic things we do. The octagon, I mean, we're getting very close to the days where we need to beat someone into a bloody pulp in order to get excited. Boxing is no longer even a sport worth watching because it's so congenial and so easy. So we like the blood and guts, the excitement, the shock, the putting on the, we love to be grossed out. And so we do that to sell tickets. In my opinion, then, we're selling out for the money, greed, rather than creative expression. So we keep repeating the same greed model in order to make money on tickets rather than trying to do something more stimulating. I've always felt that a motion picture, when you walk out, should make you glad you're human. It should have some little bit of socially redeeming quality. Yes, it's meant to entertain. Yes, it's meant to take you on a fantasy ride away from the, if you will, the humdrum of life. It's meant to disconnect you. But you need to walk out feeling better about yourself. And I'm very much concerned that we've sold out to the dollar rather than creative expression in the fine arts. Music has definitely, in my opinion, gone that way. So it's not so much music anymore, it's really a kind of dance. It's kind of either a dance to excite, or a dance to titillate, or a dance to get ready for whatever is sexual behavior, whatever, but it isn't music to say how beautiful it is. When you get to be my age, and you're looking for double rainbows and vintage wine, you're looking for beauty. I like things that are truly beautiful, and not just in the eye of the beholder. Flowers, aromas, fragrances, things that really inspire the best in me. And I don't see that in American culture today. I think we've sold out to the old Roman way, which is when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Let's go into the arena, let's go to the Colosseum, and let's put statues up that we can emulate, and we can show people how much we've got, how far we've come, and what we've done, rather than what can we do together. So I'm very much a social critic on that, and yet I always have the hope and optimism that we'll be the only nation to have ever two-peated. And a two-peat means you get to the top and you rest on your laurels and you lose, it, like so many kingdoms and so many empires have done. And if we could just catch that and say, wait a minute, you realize what we're doing here? We're taking the greatest experiment ever done in people who are working together, and we've sold out to the lowest common denominator. We've dumbed ourselves down for the sheer sake of trying to pleasure ourselves, rather than to try to inspire others to want to follow us. You ought to travel with me to all the other cultures. They don't really admire our culture. They just want the money. They want the money, they don't want the culture. They don't like our culture, but they're mimicking it. Probably one of the saddest things that I saw was in the grammar schools in China, where they're all watching America and all wanting what we have. They were doing the bumps and grinds in kindergarten and the first grade, emulating the bumps and grinds that they see on MTV, and they looked at me and said, you like dance? I said, no, actually, I don't. I prefer the way you were doing it earlier in the program, when you were doing it just for inspiration. I don't like that. And they said, gee, we thought you really like it. It's kind of where you are right now. And it was really sad to see that small part of our culture is the one that's being broadcast globally.
C.S. Lewis, obviously a Brit, wrote that when you don't have kings and queens, you find substitute royalty. And have we done that with our entertainers? Are they kings and queens and princes and princesses in our culture?
Sure. I think they are, for sure.
And does every culture need those kinds of figures?
I don't think they need those kinds of figures. I think they need inspiring poets, inspiring authors, inspiring parents, inspiring teachers. I always like Solomon when they said, bring me the most important person in the kingdom. and they bring the architect and the banker, and they bring everyone in. Finally, they bring this old haggard teacher. How could this old woman be the most important? She was all of their teachers, sire. So I think we need to emulate a different kind of person. But it doesn't come easy, because we love to be excited. We're a fantasy. We love fantasy, and we all want to be Cinderella, and we want to find the magic slipper. We're trying to get success in a bottle or in a pill, and it just doesn't come that way, I don't think.
You came from a family where your father was gone. You somehow survived and turned out and did some good things. What are your thoughts on the breakup of families, and can people survive these kinds of dysfunctional families and thrive?
I think they can. And I think adversity does one of two things. It either makes you feel that you're not any good, or makes you want to be better. And so you don't have to wear the uniform of your environment. You can create a new environment. I think basically that's what I did. Didn't like what happened in our family. I thought maybe I was the reason they broke up. Children always take the blame. But I did think that I wanted to be more or better. My father drank a lot. He emulated smoking, all the movies. In every movie theater in the United States, the smoking section was the cost the most. It was called the loges. You got a leather chair and an ashtray. And so the smokers were privileged in those days. So smoking, more doctors smoked Chesterfield than any other brand. And so there really is a mimicking, or if you will, a modeling going on. And that's what it is. So you can be like your parents or choose to be different from your parents. But you can't blame your parents. So everything is a choice in life, and being responsible for your own behavior. But I think role modeling is so important, and parents need to spend more time with their children than money. I really, really impeach and implore, not impeach, but implore parents. Give your children roots and wings instead of loot and things. What you leave in your children as values is much more important than what you leave to them as valuables in your estate. And giving your children a new BMW, you may think is something you want to do for them, but in truth, you're really trying to show how successful you are and making your children be success clones of yourself. So it's so much more important to let children do things for themselves so they don't become, if you will, codependent and entitled in a society where instead of being born in America, you have to say, I've been given a passport to success by being born in this great free country. Now what am I going to do? What can I do for you instead of what can you do for me? I think that's the most important attitude. It's the one that, my father left. He was unsuccessful, but he never beat me. And so I didn't go through a lot of abuse. I just went through a lot of inadequacy and guilt. And inadequacy in not feeling more than mediocre, and guilt in every time I did something well, I thought I might be just lucky. It might be too good to be true. But you finally realize after all that it's who you observe, who you imitate, what you read, and what you watch that really determines who you're going to be.
Okay, we'll be back with our final segment with author Dennis Waitley in just a moment. Stay tuned. And we're back with our final segment with author Dennis Waitley, the author of many books, including Seeds of Greatness and his latest, The Dragon and the Eagle. We talked a bit about your father, but now your grandmother, as you said, played a huge role, and it seems to me that maybe you filled gaps in your life with different people. What role did she play in filling some of the gaps that others may have left in their wake?
She filled the greatest gap. She made me feel like I was special, like I was a good boy, that I mowed a good lawn, that I trimmed it, and I put the droppings in the right bag, and she said, "Wow, you really can mow a great lawn. That deserves some apple pie." And she would say, "You know, I've been watching you, and you're one of the most special young people I've ever been privileged enough to know, and I'm so glad to be your grandmother, and I want you to read, because books will take you where you can't go in person, and you can learn from dead people. You know, they've made every mistake you can make, and you don't have to do everything by trial and error. You can learn from their mistakes and their successes." And she said, oh my grandson, you're such a good boy, and I know you're going to do well." And I could hardly wait to get there on Saturday. I mean, it was like my fix. She was my opiate because she gave me encouragement. And I think that's one of the most important things you can get in life early, is somebody thinking you have world-class potential.
What about your family? What was it like being a husband and a father, and how did you bring these principles to your family, and what have you seen as the results?
Well, I think it's not been easy because they say, "Well, you're just dad." I mean, come on. You know, when you ski, why don't you use your Olympic visualization? You look a little scared, Dad. So I've always been held accountable. So I've never been able to preach to my children because they've said, "Is this your 30-minute or your 40-minute deal? We've got some important things to do, Dad." And they've made me realize I'd rather watch a winner than hear one any day. So I've gone easy on the preaching. But my children have turned out pretty well. My boys, one's a fitness trainer and the other one's a communications installer. My girls are both PhDs and gone on to carry the mantle. Interestingly enough, my daughters have carried the author, speaker. I think my son said, "You know, he works too hard," or "He's gone too much," or "He's just dad." I remember one of my sons said, "So what do? You kind of learn a script, you deliver it in a kind of a believable way." I said, "But the problem is they ask you questions. And unless you've been there and failed, it's really hard to come up with an answer based on what you've read. You really have to base it on experience." So that's why I didn't bring my sons into the business. I decided to let them go out and get life all over them. But I think if it were going to be said that I love my family, they're the core of my life, and all I have ever wanted is to be somebody that a grandchild could emulate and walk in on me unannounced and not be shocked by what I was doing. So I have 12 grandchildren, and now I have a great-granddaughter. That's how you know you're getting old. You know you're getting old when you look at your baby daughter that you carried when you were a Navy jet pilot, and she's a grandmother. And I look at her and I say, "Hey, Grandma." And she says, "Hey, old man." I said, "Okay." So I'll pretend she's my granddaughter. But I think that family circle is very important to me, and setting an example by the way I treat people has been the key. And because the preaching is so easy. You can do it on stage, you can do it in front of a camera with a microphone, but it's when you're off stage, when the lights are out, when you're sitting at the bar or you're sitting home, that's when they watch you. And that's when the preaching stops and the, if you will, catching values rather than preaching values.
What is the role of spirituality, of religion, in your case, I believe Christianity, in all of this? I mean, for instance, can you achieve greatness? Can you be a great person and do all this without that element?
I don't think so. I think spirituality, in whatever you believe, that there's more to it than me, that there's not only a greater power to be thankful for, that teaches you gratitude. And I think that unless you have that, you tend to either be totally insecure or totally arrogant. And arrogance is God's gift to shallow people. I think a belief system that is set in principle to me it's like playing the game of life with rules. And the rules are set up by great spiritual leaders from the past, and those rules have never changed. And they're like the 10 Commandments of the rules of the game. You break the rule, you get penalized. And I really believe strongly that spirituality keeps books on all of us, and that there's that spirituality leads to morality or amorality if you're not spiritual. Now, also it gives you humility and a humbleness that your mission in life is to help increase other people's lives, and therefore you really are playing win-win. So spirituality teaches you win-win. If you win, I win. If I help you win, then I win. And I think without that, you're looking at yourself as the center of the universe, and you're trying to make up a reason for why you're here, and so you think it's collecting the most toys, almost like the pharaohs of Egypt. They got it all wrong. They built pyramids using slaves so they could be buried with their treasures in the monument to their own progress. It took 40 or 50 years to build, only to discover that they could take none of the material things in the afterlife. So the spirituality is all you really have going for you in the long run, in my opinion.
Does it matter what my belief system is in terms of these issues?
I think it does, because I think a belief system that has little regard for human life, or that would allow terrorism or even encourage it, or the destruction of innocent people for your religious cause, would be something that I would really look at as being a fundamental flaw, maybe not in the religion itself, but in the way that it's been passed down or practiced. So I think it's very important for that wonderful golden rule of the way you're treating people. And I don't think you can use your religion strictly as a sword.
What about for you? How did your faith formulate, and how has it impacted your life, and what role did it play?
Well, it was a long road because I did all the things you normally do. I played on the Presbyterian softball team, but the Lutherans had better uniforms, and my father was Roman Catholic, my mother was Church of England. I married a Southern Baptist, and Billy Graham and I were talking in the trailer at one of his Billy Graham ministries. He said, "You've had an interesting journey with the Lord, haven't you?" He said, "You've written the book Seeds of Greatness. Let me ask you this. What denomination are you?" I said, "I was hoping you might give me a suggestion, Dr. Graham." And he said, so when did it happen for you? I said, "Gosh, not until about 1975. He said, "Really? So that's only about 3 years before you wrote the book." And I said, "Yeah, I was not doing too well, going through a divorce, and thought that God was my co-pilot." He said, "Yeah, typical Navy pilot. God's your co-pilot, but you're the pilot, right?" I said, "Right." So Louis Evans, who was a strong Christian preacher, took me up flying. He knew that would get my attention, and he turned the gas off. As he turned the gas off, pulled the key out, and we were actually sputtering and coasting over the ocean. He said, "It's about time you made a commitment." And a commitment is when you really decide that your Lord and Savior is the one that's guiding your life, and not just using it as a, if you will, instruction manual. And he was being realistic. I think he knew how to get me to finally commit. And so I got on my knees in the airplane. Maybe I was afraid that he was actually going to land in the ocean, but I didn't think so. But I made a commitment in 1975, and I think that was very important for me to turn my life over to a greater power and not have God do my work or answer every question or every call, because I think God gives us the ability to make choices that are good or bad depending on how strongly we use Him as the field judge and a moral compass in our lives. So I've always used that. I pray and I ask. I don't always receive everything I want, but one thing I do know is that the telephone line's always open. And that's why I believe how I do.
Well, Dennis Waitley, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Mark. It's been great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Join us next time for another edition of the Bully Pulpit program, where our guests get to speak what's on their mind. We'll see you then.